Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets have surprisingly managed to lean on their offense early in the season, but is it sustainable if they want to be long-term successful this year? We dive in on the numbers coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And, Doug, I got to tell you, if you said that the Nets would be 6-7, 13 games through the season, some real vibes about them, I don't think either one of us would have suggested the offense has been the majority of the reason why they're here. We're going to get into some of the stats about it, but is this a sustainable model? Can this be an offensive core that drives this Nets team to success?
Yeah, like we said, we talked about the defense at length yesterday and sort of the things that we thought were maybe, things that could improve, things that we were just a little bit worried about. And like you said, with the offense, we're in an interesting spot where the Nets are right now, because I don't think many I don't want to talk for everybody. I did not think that this offense would be like that prolific of an offense just based on the personnel they had. I thought they could probably, tread water, be above average, but I just didn't think really in the modern NBA that they were totally built to be like sort of high powered. And so far during the season, I mean, if you look at different just sort of offensive ratings or offensive efficiency, in terms of offensive efficiency, they rank 11th. In terms of overall offensive rating, they rank 10th. And I think, for me personally, and I think I'm probably speaking for you as well, that is coming as a surprise to me. And I do think there's a world where it's mostly sustainable, though it's going to rely on a few other things that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I think it's sustainable, and I agree with everything that you mentioned there in terms of being surprised here early in the year. The one thing that I think I would pose the question back to you and for myself is, Cam Thomas has been injured, and okay, if he returns, then that's going to be a big factor, and we could discuss that. My only real concern here is that at the moment, the Nets have relied on one of the things that we think is a positive, which is, hey, next man up, guy comes in off the bench, right? Fills the void. Dorian Finney-Smith, Lonnie Walker the fourth has been the early season revelation. Can you depend on a guy that's shooting 46% from beyond the arc, right? A guy that's averaging career highs across the board. Now, maybe this is the Nets lucked into or smartly, as Sean Marks has done in the past, went out to the market and found a guy that nobody else was really concerned about giving a significant contract to, and they're going to reap the benefits. But if any of these one elements comes back down to earth, including Cam Thomas getting back on the court and not being a 25-plus point scorer, then our attention turns to a lot of different areas I think that this team maybe has been able to gloss over so far.
Yeah, and I think that's, part of like sort of what we're saying is that I think that on a high level, when you look at the offensive efficiency based on who they have and what they've done, I think that there's a world where you can see it sort of repeat. But like you said, there's been a part of this offense that has relied. At some point, you probably have relied too much on guys you didn't expect it from. Now, it's all nice stories, and I think that it's good, but there's sort of a reason the expectation level on a few of these guys was on the lower side, right? Like time in the league, sort of what we've seen from them in the past. And when you actually look at some of the numbers that the Nets are rolling with, specifically, let's start with Lonnie Walker. I actually am a little bit worried that Lonnie Walker has carried sort of much more of this offense than we've even given time to. He's been so good that and in a way that probably isn't totally sustainable. I think it's like moderately sustainable. And it's not all just complete, run hotter than the sun kind of stuff, but he's on, 51-46 splits right now in terms of, field goals and 3-point percentage. That's I kind of at a little bit way more volume than anyone thought. Like career high in field goal attempts, career high in 3-point attempts, not a career high in minutes. Just as worth noting on that. And obviously the field goal percentage and the 3-point percentage are his career highs as well. There's a world where that is actually masking some of this, and it's just simply. I think he's a great signing. it's a great underreported story about how good he's been. You can't reasonably just go look at these numbers and say he's going to keep being like this over the course of an 82-game season. The reason we know that is because he just has a pretty long track record of being basically the same guy over, which is about 36% from three, about 43 to 44% from the field, right? Like, and so when you just have, hundreds and hundreds of minutes in the books already on something like that, there's a world where you have to see it sustainable. Now, look, we'll go off and talk about the guys they don't have right now and how they could be coming back and fill the void again too. But I just want to kind of pay notion, like sort of, it's not even damning with faint praise. It's just saying, let's just look at this realistically. Lonnie Walker has played way more than we thought he was going to, and played way better than even reasonable assumptions could have thought.
And I think specifically with Lonnie Walker too, and maybe with this team overall, the hard thing for me early days is to not take away the enjoyment and the excitement of watching guys overperform, right? And watching them help the team overachieve. Because in the back of your mind, you're going, oh, but are we going to be there? 20 more games, 30 more games from now. So there are some key players, I think, when you get beyond the nice surprises, that actually do have to hit their mark, that actually do need to find a way to be the offensive players we thought that they were going to be. So we'll get into a couple of those guys here in just a moment, and why we think that they obviously can be that for Brooklyn. But you know that our partners over at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd. We've been telling you about this to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each and every week all season long. So whether you're prepping for your daily draft or scouting on the waiver wire, every week you know that we're going to be providing you with the players that are a guaranteed fit on your roster. So Dougster, let's take a look at some of those picks this week on eBay's guaranteed fit fantasy picks of the week.
Yeah, look, if you're rolling through fantasy this week, there's a couple really, really good ones that you actually really want to have your eye on pretty strongly. If you're playing in some deeper leagues, you've already known that Santi Aldama is he could be, I'm not going to call him a league winner, but now that the Grizz completely stink and can't seem to keep anyone healthy, this guy's playing huge minutes. He did 17 and 10 when I was off the bench in 36 minutes against the Spurs, gets the start against Boston, goes completely nuke, 28 points, 12 rebounds, 6 assists. You just have to have Santi Aldama on your radar. Those minutes are going to stick again, friends. I mean, they're in such a hard way over in Grizzland. The other guy to keep an eye on here, a little more injury related, Max Strus from the Cavs. He's been getting more opportunity. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell out of the lineup. They've lost old friend Karis LeVert to some injury as well. They haven't been able to keep everyone healthy. Strus has just, if the games are close, he's in line for major minutes, can usually push around 40 if things are going right. Has shot the ball pretty well this season, rebounded the heck out of it, which you didn't think would be the case with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, but that's been there as well. So just a couple of guys to keep an eye on when it comes to fantasy stuff. Josh Lloyd, Fantasy Basketball, has been helping you with your fantasy championship for years, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. It's the same with your vehicle. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or you like this, your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
All right, so as we continue to take a look at the offensive side of the Brooklyn Nets basketball team, we can say, hey, Cam Thomas, and when he gets back, and I do want to talk about him because I think there's this version of it where people say too small of a sample size or winning basketball. I'm not really concerned about him. I think the player that a lot of people have talked about, as have we, is Mikal Bridges. And there's a lot of different versions of this that we can look at, but I'll even just go at the highest possible level. Because actually, when we talk defense, that was maybe one of the things I look at Mikal and say, hey, want to see him dial it up over there. He's a 118 net rating offensively this season. Like you would think, based on when we watch these games and some of the struggles that he's had, dribbling, finding his shot, falling out of the rhythm of the offense at times. But it turns out he's averaging 35 minutes a game, almost 36, 20 points per game. The assists are all in line with it. The percentages that we've talked about kind of over the start of this season, well, he's hitting over 38% now from beyond the arc. So like all of these little things are starting to round into form. And I think it ultimately just comes down to something that you mentioned a few episodes ago, maybe slightly in passing, but I know you meant it intentionally. He's played a ton of basketball, and he played FIBA in the summer. And I think maybe the start of this season has just been him like getting the NBA season legs underneath him. I feel pretty comfortable saying that in another 10 games, we're going to talk about Mikal being right where we expected him to be.
Yeah, I think that there's probably a sea legs thing happening with him a little bit for sure. Like you said, the efficiency is starting to round back into form. The usage is not coming all the way back, so I think I'll pump the brakes a little bit on getting him to like 26 points a game or higher. If you had him projected for that going into the season higher, because you saw some like linear growth on his time in Brooklyn from last year, I think we can probably pause that for now. I don't think that's coming back. Now, some of that is just sort of shot redistribution to guys like Cam Thomas, to guys like Lonnie Walker, who are getting way more shots and usage than I think that we thought going in if you were really bullish on the scoring numbers. But from the efficiency standpoint, if we can see the usage climb a little bit with the like linear progression on the usage this season with the sustained efficiency, which I think is, like you said, rounding back into shape, I think there is reason to think that like there's more here from Bridges. We've seen him getting into the mid-range more. He's snaking screens a little bit better to just try to find that shot that was not really there for him early in the season. He's been, I feel like working like not overtime, but working considerably harder to get those shots he's very good at. I think we've seen that over the last 2 to 3 games. I think if that continues, and those are just good shots for him. Like he can take those mid-range shots and you can feel pretty good about it. I think as long as that can continue, that's one way you can look at this Nets offense and say, hey, there's room for improvement here. Bridges is better than this. With a few more shots at the same efficiency, we should see the offense tick up. And I think that I wouldn't even call them early season struggles, but like there was just not, it sucks with that. It sucks with expectation with these guys because the expectation is just so high, maybe even unreasonably high, because the numbers haven't been horrible, but if you weight them against your expectation, they look way worse. Right. And like that. And I think that's part of the problem with him.
Yeah, it's funny. Like we talked about this with Cameron Johnson. Could he be a 20-point scorer? And he's getting his legs. You see this the last few games for him too, starting to get up to it, right? But it's like to your point. Well, Mikal needs to be a 25-point scorer. Okay, then you're disappointed. But he's averaging 20 points a game. And I think is that enough? Would I like it to be 22? When you and I talked about this at the start of the year, that's kind of where we thought 22, maybe 23. So yeah, a little bit better. Same thing for a guy like Cameron Johnson. But I'm okay, or at least the track record with a guy like Mikal suggests, hey, practice patience here, and he's going to at least give you the consistency. The usage number is maybe where we need to adjust what success looks like for him this season, right? Because he just may not get near not only the same volume in the 27 games last season, but it's the same volume that we may have projected this year, especially with the emergence of Cam Thomas as well. The other thing here I'll mention in terms of the fluidity of these lineups, specifically maybe when it comes to Mikal, and then listen, you can back out a lot of different things and paint different pictures here. But when Dorian Finney-Smith and Mikal Bridges share the court, it's so funny, man. Dorian Finney-Smith has covered the gap here a bit, early in the season in a big way, and we've loved it. But when you put the two of them on the court and you back out Dinwiddie, Cameron Johnson, Nicholas Claxton, so those two guys just functioning together. Now, that can still be with a Ben Simmons. It can be with a Cam Thomas. It can be with Lonnie Walkers and the like. It's 106 minutes at a massively negative net rating, minus 22.2, 103 offensively, effectively, 125 defensively. Now, there's a million other things here, right? Is Day'Ron Sharpe on the court during these minutes? That can be a big factor. Who else is helping you drive the offense? But it made me think about like the model of player and how Mikal Bridges stands to excel. When Ben Simmons is in the lineup, when it's pushing pace, great. When you have an on-ball ISO creator like Cam Thomas in the lineup, that really helps Mikal Bridges. When you have guys in both Dorian Finney-Smith and Mikal who are athletic enough to do certain things, but they're not breaking guys down and slicing in between, double teams and blitzing defenses, it's going to create some funky moments. And I think Mikal is susceptible to that in a way that we would say number one elite superstars aren't, but number one elite number twos, which is what Mikal is, you're going to have those lumps, I think, inside of your numbers at times.
Yeah, so like one funny thing about him is that I think we all agree Mikal Bridges is a really, really good offensive player, right? But like he's not a player at this point in his career, probably won't ever be, that demands like outsized attention from an opposing defense, right? Like they're not going to just specifically scheme against Bridges in a way that you see sort of some of these other like elite offensive talents, right? Where you have to like think about throwing doubles at him. You have to think about, trapping, blitzing him, making sure he doesn't get through the spots. Like, I don't think teams are really that worried about it. If he gets his, he gets his. And I think that's sort of, I mean, it's been kind of the same with Cam Thomas too. Like he hasn't drawn these outside attention. When you're not those kind of guys, and the Nets don't have any of those guys really at all, it's always going to be a little harder on your offense. So then when you get these pairings, like you said, that they just don't have, I think probably a way to put it is like, they just don't have any offensive juice. Like there's just not a lot of juice here. It's guys that are all fine. It's guys that are all, some of them are well above average or / good, but they just don't command extra attention from everyone. And that's kind of sometimes a big story in the NBA. Is like, who commands extra attention? Or do you just, if you don't have one of those guys, you need like 3 or 4 way above average guys. So obviously we can look at the Jokic's, the Embiids, the Lukas, like those guys, even like Shea, these guys that just demand, I'm leaving a lot out by the way, but like demand you take a hard look ahead of time about like how you're going to scheme against them. Or you can have like, the version of it that's like, I don't know, who's a good example of this? Like the Rockets, maybe. It's like, it's like Van Vliet and Jalen and Jabari and Şengün. Like they have a lot of dudes out there who can kind of like, it's like enough really pretty good guys to make it so you don't need this one, hub of the offense. The Nets just don't have that. So it's going to be really hard for them at times to find combinations that give the offense enough juice. And so I'm not surprised when you see some of these combinations like Mikal and DFS. I mean, even Mikal and Simmons those numbers have not been great. Like it's just not surprising at all, just based on sort of who they have.
And it's funny too, because you mentioned there with Ben Simmons, and by the way, like this is overwhelmingly positive in the vein of needing to just figure out. And with the way the injuries have gone, no Cameron Johnson early, now no Ben Simmons, no Cam Thomas. So like the opportunity to overlap and find the right, combinations are there. Dorian Finney-Smith, Mikal Bridges, and Ben Simmons. Take away Spencer Dinwiddie, and I say take away Lonnie Walker because he's been on the court a lot for this team in their absence. Well, 56 minutes, minus 41, an atrocious offensive rating of 85.19. Take out Lonnie Walker, though, and say, okay, but I want to know about the minutes when Cameron Johnson has been available. Again, that same 3-player combination, it's a 76-minute sample size. It's minus 25.39 because some of the guys, and right back at the top, right? Some of the surprising players who have helped us along, like Dorian Finney-Smith, again, though, when you put in another non-shooter like a Ben Simmons, it creates these problems specifically for a Mikal Bridges. So it's why I like the idea of, as this team gets healthy, knock on wood, they will at one point be 100% healthy. You won't see Dorian Finney-Smith with Mikal Bridges all the time. You'll let Ben Simmons do some facilitation when he's out there. You'll let an ISO scorer like Cam Thomas take over some things, and it'll open up some easier opportunities for Mikal. So all of this to say, Mikal Bridges is going to be fine. The numbers are going to be there. We just have to practice a little bit of patience. Coming up here in a second, we'll take that big bird's eye view. Are some of these surprising players sustainable even in reduced roles? What is going to need to happen next for this team to take the offensive end of the court and say, yes, we can hang our hat as this being a core component of our identity for the remainder of the season?
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. No better time to get in on the action over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. So if you like the Nets here coming in on Wednesday, it's a good time to get in on that money line. And we know that they've been, not exactly the money line, but they have been one of the best teams against the spread. Also, not a worse time to just going into Atlanta for you to grab a little Brooklyn on the road. Maybe some other people are sleeping on Brooklyn as well. Remember, if you win that money line bet on FanDuel, you're going to get $150. If you're a new customer, if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, no better time to get in on the action. Spreads, player props, over-unders, more like the awards markets. Good friend Cam Thomas up there on the most improved. I think he's 4th overall. Yeah, 4th overall on FanDuel and most improved. And Lonnie Walker finally makes an appearance, the NBA 6th man of the year. He's got some climbing to do to get over some of these other guys, but we're just happy to see him on the list. It's all there for you on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Kick off this season. FanDuel is the official partner of the NFL.
All right, so as we tie a little bow on our offensively minded Brooklyn Nets podcast episode, talked about the defense on our last episode, so go check that out over on YouTube, obviously, and also go check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel for national sports coverage. It's Locked On Sports Today, and they've got you covered 24/7 with all of the great coverage you expect with all the local experts as well. So you go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe. As I tell you, the first ever breaking new ground, boys, national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, just there's a player that I want to mention here that I think is like the next wave of surprising players that overachieve a little bit and help feather the gap here. But do you think that this team can sustain this version of it? We talked about the defense yesterday. It hasn't been perfect. Maybe that rounds into form a little bit. But if we think the defense is always going to be a middle or backish end of the pack kind of team, can the offense sustain this? Can they say we're going to win more games than we lose solely on the offensive production of this team?
I think what we probably end up seeing, and these work in conjunction with each other, I actually think we probably see the defense improve and the offense regress a little bit. Like, I think there's going to be a meeting point here which is to say, I think this is where the Nets end up living somewhere around 500, hopefully a little bit above. And I think I've liked the ideas that they've been sort of trying to espouse with some, at least at times, with trying to, jack as many 3-pointers as possible. And, and that's always going to lead to some maybe some randomness in terms of, where offensive production is. Right now, they're 7th overall in 3-point attempts on the season. So that's great. That's like kind of where you want to see. And by the way, all the teams above them are teams that you want to be in company of: Celtics, Mavericks, Kings. Well, not the Grizz. Everyone else: Warriors, Pacers, Nets. And so I should have read that whole list before I said that. But
not that team, but all the other teams.
So I think that like that continued focus on that, I think that there probably is a little room for a dip, just in maybe the short term as these guys just continued to not play, like Cam and Simmons. I think they kind of need those dudes. But also I think the defense, has room for growth to go up. And I think that that's going to end up being fine. So my guess is something like a meeting in the middle in terms of these rankings, with the hope that I guess the better question is, which one could you see being like really good of those two groups, the offense and the defense? Yeah. If you had to predict which one had the chance to be maybe not elite, but like really, really good, would you give the offense? Everyone's fully healthy in this scenario, by the way. Would you give the offense a better chance to be there or the defense a better chance to be there?
Defense. The answer is defense because of the length, because of the versatility. And by the way, we say this all the time, because of the track record, right? Sometimes we point to offensive things like perimeter shooting with a Royce O'Neal, a Dorian Finney-Smith. Career-wise, they've been able to do this thing successfully. Okay, great. Defensively, they have the bulk of you can make the case the bulk of their roster is guys that have done it successfully at that end of the floor. And I think that that's okay. Like, it's all right to say you're going to lean into that identity. Offensively, I just think it's good. To me, it's going to come down to who is the next guy that steps up for a wave of 10 games. Lonnie Walker is going to regress here at some point, and it's not a knock on him. It's just it's not sustainable, I don't think. So who's going to roll up here? The funny thing is, though, I will say on offense, I think the viability of unique offensive individual talents, Cam Thomas, I think that is sky high this season, right? There is this version where one or two guys, and maybe Lonnie stays in this category, they give you consistent high-level offensive performances, and it's almost the responsibility of everybody else to say, yeah, we're going to kick in some things at times on that end of the court, but then we're going to hang our hat back the other way and let you guys do that heavy lift, right? Like, there's a part of this is like, stay in your lane. Don't try to do more than you need to. And we can make the case for Mikal that at times it feels like he's pressed for that, right? I'm going to do that little extra. I'm going to find that next wave. And already, I'll just throw in this note here, because I think we mentioned it the other day. I had pulled up Spencer Dinwiddie. His perimeter shooting is closer to his time in Dallas than it is every other year of his career. So if he's going to be able to do that a little bit here, right? If Cam Johnson gets himself going as he gets his legs underneath him, you can see these players that can kind of hand the baton game to game, as long as you have the defense as like the core identity of this team.
Yeah, we didn't even mention It's glad you brought up Dinwiddie too, because he's a guy that Nets fans kind of love to blame for certain things. That's just been sort of the theme. I'm not sure why at times that kind of comes up more than it should. Maybe it's just his style. Maybe it's just, sort of his overall demeanor. I'm not really
Maybe
sure.
it's because
Just
he's
like
on an expiring contract. It's easier to blame the guy you don't think is going to be here than the guys that are part of it, right? Like Mikal and Cameron, you're going to blame them and say, come on, get it together, 4-year contracts.
Yeah, for sure. But like among guys that have actually played real minutes for the team, that's, Lonnie Walker leads the team in plus minus and Dinwiddie is second. Dinwiddie's got one of the highest offensive ratings in the team. He's shooting 38% from three, like at 6 attempts per game. Like these numbers are just, good by, maybe the assists were down a little bit, but in general, his numbers have been pretty good. And I think sometimes he gets a slightly bum rap for, again, I think it's actually stylistically people don't love it, and because it's not at times super aesthetically pleasing, but the results have been just good this season. There's really no other way around it.
And by the way, as we'll get out of here in a second, I have one more player I do want to make mention of here. But on the Spencer Dinwiddie note, players that are superstars, right? I mean, I'm mentioning Kyrie Irving, not in a negative way as being a former net, but it's like, hey, you can have you can take bad looking shots. We used to talk about this all the time, right? Like you could have bad looking shots, you could heave and chuck and whatever, but because we know what the ceiling is of your talent, you're willing to live with that stuff. With the Spencer Dinwiddie and the fan base, it always feels like, hey, you're walking a fine line here, buddy. Like, you go ahead and break a guy down off the dribble and drive the basket and get to the line and get free throws. Awesome. But if the very next possession, you take an ill-advised chuck and you do a heat check, it's like, excuse me, buddy, that's not your lane, right? Like
that's a good point.
That's
a good point. Yeah, he gets judged a little more on a possession-by-possession basis than probably anybody else. Hey, look, that's sometimes what happens with being a point guard also. All right, we're going to get out of here. Scheduling note, we'll be here after the Wednesday game doing a live, leading into Thanksgiving. I don't know what everyone's plans are for Wednesday night, but we'll be doing some live stuff on YouTube. So make sure you check that out leading to the holiday. In the meantime, make sure you join subtext.com/LockedOnNets. Get in on the texting action over there. Make sure you subscribe to YouTube, subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast as well.
Do you believe in this quote, Doug? Thanksgiving Day is a good day to recommit our energies to giving thanks and just giving. Now, that's Amy Grant, but I'm more about consuming and taking naps.
One of the all-time great posts. We're back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball, gobble, gobble, basketball, yeah.